Have you ever been at a huge concert or a protest and just felt completely swept up in the energy? Like you were part of something way bigger, something that wasn't exactly you anymore? Well, we're about to dive into a powerful and honestly a pretty unsettling theory about what happens to our minds in those moments, all based on the work of a guy named Gustave Le Bon. So how does a rational person like you just disappear into a mob? Let's break it down.
So Le Bon kicks things off with this really simple but brilliant analogy. On one side, you've got the individual. That's you, a single drop of water. You're rational, you think for yourself, you're independent. But the moment you join a crowd, you become the thing on the right, a giant ocean wave. It's incredibly powerful, sure, but it's also primitive and totally impulsive. It doesn't think, it just crashes. And that transformation from the single drop to the unthinking wave, that's the core of his entire theory.
And this phenomenon, he gave it a name, the crowd mind. The whole idea is that when we get into a big enough group, our individual brains kind of just switch off. We stop being a bunch of separate people, and instead, we merge into this single new being, a collective creature that operates on a completely different, much more primal level.
Okay, so let's really dig into that first big idea. This startling premise that a bunch of different people, all with their own unique minds, can suddenly start sharing one single collective mind.
And this quote just nails it, doesn't it? See, it's not that you're just influenced by the wave, it's that you, the individual drop of water, literally cease to exist. You're completely absorbed. It's a pretty chilling thought. But what actually makes this happen? How does it work?
So, how exactly does this vanishing act happen? I mean, what are the mechanics here? Le Bon didn't just say, poof, you're gone. He actually laid out 3 specific psychological triggers that cause this complete and total transformation.
Yep, he pinpointed 3 key things. And when these 3 things happen together, they work to completely erase your individuality and give birth to this new crowd mind. Let's take a look at what they are.
As you can see, it is a seriously powerful combo. First up, anonymity. When you're in a huge group, you feel invisible, right? And that feeling just dissolves your sense of personal responsibility. Next, you've got contagion. Emotions, panic, anger, joy, you name it. They spread like a virus, jumping from person to person in an instant, no rational thought required. And the final piece of the puzzle, suggestibility. The crowd enters this almost hypnotic state where it's incredibly open to any strong idea or command, no questions asked.
So, once those 3 triggers have all fired off, what is this new creature, this crowd mind, actually like? If it isn't rational, what's its personality?
Well, according to Le Bon, the crowd mind is basically primitive. It thinks in simple, powerful pictures, not in complicated logic. You absolutely cannot reason with it. It's driven entirely by gut feelings and raw emotion. And this is why a crowd is so incredibly volatile. One minute it can be committing savage acts of violence, and the next it can be performing incredible acts of heroism. It has no stable character, it just reacts.
To really drive this point home, Le Bon used another fantastic analogy, one that makes this idea of a suggestible, volatile mind feel terrifyingly real.
I want you to picture a town, just full of normal, sensible folks. Then one day, this super charismatic hypnotist rolls into the town square. He doesn't use logic or facts. He uses powerful words, big gestures, and this air of absolute certainty. And he puts the entire crowd under his spell.
And here's the crucial point. For Le Bon, a crowd is basically a hypnotized mob. It has completely surrendered its will to the hypnotist, whether that's a leader or just a powerful idea. And in that state, it will believe anything and do anything it's told, things that any single person in that crowd would find totally crazy or horrifying if they were on their own.
So this all leads to a pretty dark and logical conclusion. If the crowd is this irrational, hypnotized beast, you can't lead it with reason. Nope. You need a completely different set of tools. And Le Bon, well, he basically wrote the playbook on how to do it.
So let's just ask the question straight up. If facts and well-reasoned arguments are totally useless against the crowd mind, what's left? How do you actually steer this powerful, unthinking wave? This table here, it breaks down Le Bon's 3 main tactics. First, you use simple, vivid images, catchy slogans, and powerful symbols, not complicated policy proposals. Second, repetition. You just repeat a simple idea over and over and over again until it completely bypasses critical thought and just becomes accepted as truth. And third, the leader has to project immense prestige and charisma, this aura of being godlike and totally confident. I mean, think about a dictator's rally. They don't give nuanced arguments. They use simple symbols, they repeat simple slogans, and they project an image of absolute, unshakable power. It is Le Bon's playbook, step by step.
And that playbook, that brings us to the final and most chilling part of this story, the real-world legacy of this idea. Because Le Bon's theory wasn't just some academic thought experiment. It became one of the most dangerous books of the 20th century.
So you gotta ask, why? What made this book, written way back in 1895, so powerful and so terrifyingly influential for decades to come? Okay, so here is the incredible irony of it all. Le Bon wrote this book as a warning. He was terrified of mob violence and the growing power of the masses. But instead of being read as a cautionary tale, it was picked up and used as a practical how-to guide. Dictators saw his work as a blueprint for harnessing the raw power of the masses, a way to bypass reason and use pure emotion to control entire nations.
And this timeline just shows you the terrifying speed at which his theory went from being a warning to a weapon. He writes the book in the late 1800s, and just a few decades later, his exact principles are being used on a massive scale by totalitarian regimes to grab and hold on to absolute power.
And this is maybe the most important thing to remember about all of this. Le Bon's work was a diagnosis of what he saw as a kind of societal disease. The absolute tragedy is that other people read his diagnosis and decided to weaponize the virus. Which of course brings us to a huge question for our own time. Le Bon was writing about physical crowds in a town square, but think about our world right now. Social media, viral hashtags, online mobs, the tools for anonymity, for emotional contagion, for instant suggestibility. You could argue they're more powerful than they have ever been. So I'll just leave you with this thought. Is Le Bon's crowd mind not just some relic of the past, but maybe a defining feature of our digital future?